The evolution of Darwin's head. There will be no justice as long as man will stand with a gun and destroy those who are weaker than he is. Isaac Bashevis Singer. In his autobiography, Charles Darwin looks back and realizes how his love for science gradually preponderated, as he puts it, over every other taste. But initially, Darwin kept up his other passions, in particular for shooting, which persisted, as Darwin says of himself, in nearly full force, until he'd shot almost all the birds and animals that he needed for his collection on board the Beagle. Then slowly shooting would interfere with his work, and Darwin gave up his gun forever. He'd been obsessed with shooting since childhood. I do not believe that anyone, Darwin recalled, could have shown more zeal for the most holy cause than I did for shooting birds. How well I remember killing my first snipe, and my excitement was so great that I had much difficulty in reloading my gun from the trembling of my hands. How I did enjoy shooting, but I think that I must have been half-consciously ashamed of my zeal, for I tried to persuade myself that shooting was almost an intellectual employment. It required so much skill to judge where to find most game, and to hunt the dogs well. My taste long continued, though, to my deep mortification, my father once said to me, and here he relived Dr. Darwin's great anger, "You care for nothing but shooting, dogs, and rat-catching, and you'll be a disgrace," his father had declared, "to yourself and to the rest of your family." But later, on giving up his gun, Darwin discovered that the pleasure of observing and reasoning was a much higher one than that of skill and sport. Then, in an aside, apocalyptic for gun lovers, Darwin suggests that his change of heart was so radical it caused a change in his physical appearance. In other words, that he, Darwin, actually metamorphosed. He recounts what had happened on his return from the voyage. That my mind, Darwin explained, became developed through my pursuits during the voyage, is rendered probable by a remark made by my father, who was the most acute observer I ever saw. My father was a man of a sceptical disposition, and far from being a believer in phrenology. But on first seeing me after the voyage, he turned round to my sisters and exclaimed, "Why, the shape of his head is quite altered." These were Darwin's father's exact words. Darwin was recognizable, but for his changed head, as if giving up his gun had made it mutate. After the claim, his son's head was now very different. Neither he nor Darwin provides any more detail. But if this change had transformed Darwin into a monster, then it's likely it was noticed by witnesses. Yet, if the opposite was the case, as is more likely, and his son's looks had become more pleasing, then the transformation of Darwin's head is a game-changer, a paradigm shift which rivals man's descent from apes. For just as with Alice in Alice in Wonderland, when her body grew larger, or when it shrank, Charles Darwin's long overlooked evolutionary spurt has to provide man with a whole new perspective. It's an odd quirk of social evolution that both gun nuts and the military should appear bullet-headed. They're shorn and thin-lipped, with an alienating look, hostile, aggressive, and darkly threatening, as if hell-bent on creating a self-selecting stereotype by their stamping and strutting about in fatigues, speaking in a machine-gun staccato, On the floor, asshole, and killing anyone, quite untroubled by second thoughts. Their stirred-up hatred is expressed in stylized expletives. Die, motherfuckers! Snuff 'em! Waste 'em! Spat out in metallic voices to mask any signs of fear, along with the grim lifelessness that passes for cool. With an all-consuming avarice, the US has profited from pioneering the entertainment value of guns. Its video games now allow you to kill hundreds every hour, while its real-life gun deaths are thought normal. A week after a man opened fire in a Tucson car park, leaving 6 people dead and 13 wounded, the Crossroads of the West gun show rolled into town, and sold out of the same Glock 9mm just used. Crossroads gun shows have 600,000 visitors a year. A My First Rifle, made by Cricket, is popular. It's a working version of Daddy's gun for 4 to 10-year-olds, and it comes in pink or black for $140. Such mass conformity is approved of by US luminaries. The movie star Arnold Schwarzenegger has swaggeringly stated, "I have a love interest in every one of my films. It's a gun." Charlton Heston was also married to a gun, and if anyone threatened to separate the happy couple by taking his toy, he'd promise them 5 chilling words. "From my cold, dead hands." And when their president was challenged after Lennon had just been shot dead in New York about the US's psychopathic passion for its guns, Reagan said the US was still howdy-doody. But imagine for a second if, thanks to Darwin's hint in his Recollections of the Development of My Mind and Character, his autobiographical field notes of 1876, there's a previously unidentified evolutionary force which ensures that by giving up guns you get a makeover. Imagine if all of those following in Darwin's footsteps were now able to reproduce this evolutionary change and mysteriously acquire a more pleasing look. What if, instead of seeking selfish thrills from someone's dying, spewing blood in a sadistic spray of man's bullets, it dawns on him that it could be more fun to spend time working out how the world's put together? In a youthful portrait, Darwin looks notably suspicious. He's frowning, and even seems faintly criminal. But later, when the passion for killing's cast aside, his looks are benign and engagingly congenial. This before and after evidence that guns are bad for the appearance makes you wonder if the so-called right to bear arms in the US Constitution, which bullies insist is Holy Writ, doesn't amount to natural selection by ugly Americans, for whom gun worship is really a sorry form of self-harm. For despite its proud citizens owning millions of guns, each gun stops them from escaping their armed cul-de-sac and embracing the survival of the friendliest. Nothing will end war unless people themselves, Einstein would say, refuse to go to war. If my soldiers were to think, echoed Frederick the Great, not one of them would remain in the army. Man has no right to kill his brother, Shelley asserted. It is no excuse that he does so in uniform, for by his doing so he only adds the infamy of servitude to the crime of murder. Whoever may doubt that a backlog of fetish behavior by those spending years fondling their guns can have spawned mutants with wayward trigger fingers and maybe even hideously bullet-shaped heads. Forgets that someone who once threw away his gun suddenly found that he'd grown a new mind, one that helped him change the world for the better, and made him nicer looking as a result. Also, despite received wisdom, Darwin said it wasn't the strongest of the species which survives, but the one that is the most adaptable to change, and guns certainly outlive their survival value. When his .38 caliber revolver failed to fire at his intended victim during a hold-up in Long Beach, California, a would-be robber called James Elliot peered down the barrel and tried the trigger again. This time, it worked. Darwin, the studious rationalist, spells it out clearly in this graphic account of his life. Namely, as soon as he gave up his compulsion for killing, it changed the very shape of his organ of thought. Yet it was Darwin's other themes that grabbed headlines, namely, that man had come from apes, and that the world took longer than 6 days to make, disproving the Bible's account in Genesis, and that man's notions of a supreme power were irrelevant, either to the earth's origin or to its future, despite creationists invoking God to destroy Darwin and praying that their vengeful God end his world. But Darwin's agnostic ghost, with its head made of dust, in an attractive arrangement, may be whispering, "Guns are crap. Be prettier. Change for the better," and might welcome Darwin's remedy getting exposure, whereby the 200 million unlovely American gun nuts can be beautified along with others worldwide, without having to pay thousands for cosmetic surgery, since each may alter their looks just by thinking. Christopher Walken, the actor, once hearteningly sowed a fresh seed in the American psyche. "I don't even like holding them. Whenever I hold a gun, I want to get it out of my hand as quick as possible." So perhaps, when Darwin's formula for man's future has taken over the entire human gene pool, then the last attention-seeking boar waving a gun will be ignored, like a dull drunk in a bar. For it's never the job of thinking people to side with the executioners, said Camus, and Oscar Wilde backed him up. War's weapons aren't wicked, just vulgar. Yet US gun lobbies persist. Guns don't kill people. It's people that kill people, stupid. Or are you gonna blame pencils for misspelling, dumbass? No. But when zillions of eons have evolved a sophisticated biocomputer, Homo sapiens, with its infinite brain, this groundbreaking entity that enables a planet to attain a measure of self-awareness, only the shallow would attack one at random, as it emerges from its long assembly line, then smash it from their compulsion to take life, before they're able to master life's manual. When coming to this last verse, in June 2011, I saw a stenciled slogan on the pavement that said all of this in 4 words in red paint. Its message read, "Killing people is rude." The US has 500 million guns in private hands, and states outlawing Darwin's teaching. The US devours 1 million animals every hour, and it shows no sign at all of changing. But if all of its guns and its gun movies were yawned at, and if no animals were processed into American fat, and if scientific observation replaced bigoted faith, the ugly American would prove a prettier sight.